The Distinguished Flying Cross DFC Medal is awarded to an individual for heroism and extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight. Today is February 3rd, 2004. The Video Club of Leisure World is producing this interview of Donald V. Black, a member of the Distinguished Flying Cross Society, Orange County chapter, and he is being interviewed by Dick Tyhurst, another member of that same chapter. Don, tell us a little bit about where you came from and how you got started in this whole thing.
Be happy to do that. I come from Janesville, Wisconsin, very small city in southern Wisconsin. And like most guys of that period, an awful lot of us wanted to be pilots, but we didn't know how to be pilots. But right after graduation from high school in 1941, along came the Japanese and bombed Pearl Harbor, and there was my opportunity. So within weeks after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, I enlisted in the Army Air Corps and waited around until they were ready for me. In March of '42, I got on a train, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, took the train out to Santa Ana, California, ended up in the Army Air Corps Basic Training Facility, which is now the Orange County Fairgrounds. Right. I didn't know it then.
Yeah, that's correct.
And we were the first class of cadets, and I stayed there for, I guess, 6 weeks, called basic training, and all we did really was slog around in the mud because it was a rainy season, January, February, 1942. I got transferred up to King City, California, to do my basic training as a pilot. And I have a picture here.
Don, technically that's primary training, right?
What did I say?
That's primary flight training. Basic training with flying was the next one.
Primary, right.
Okay, let's go.
In fact, I have a picture here of one of the happiest days of my life. This picture was taken the day I soloed in this very aeroplane on June 24th, 1942. And then I flew an aeroplane and knew I was a pilot.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I washed out on that same airplane in that same place a couple of years later.
Well, from primary, I went to Chico, California, and did my basic training. And after that point, one had to make a decision on which direction you wanted to go. And I'm a fairly small individual, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. I wanted to be a hero. So they sent me to Luke Field, Arizona, which was then the West Coast primary location for training fighter pilots. I graduated from there in class 42K, December 3rd, 1942. And it was a remarkable day, and I'll tell you one little story that makes it a little more remarkable. Right after we got out of the auditorium where we had our graduation, I was walking back to my barracks, and a sergeant was coming towards me. Now, I had my lieutenant bars on. I was an officer, and this sergeant saluted me. That sergeant was Gene Autry. Isn't that? I'll always remember that. Well, it just so happened that at this time, the Army Air Corps was expanding. So half of our class of trained fighter pilots became instructors. So I became an instructor in twin-engine advanced trainers. Now, I was 19 years old. My cadets were halfway through their training course, so I started training cadets who actually had more twin-engine flying time than I had. And I remember, well, I won't go into that. I didn't want to be an instructor. I wanted to be a hero. I wanted to go to war. I wanted to be in combat, so I kept bugging my commanding officer about every week until he got tired of it. And finally he called me in and he says, we have a secret project and they need pilots. And I said, is it combat? He says, yes. And I says, I'm your man. It was called Project 7A. So I went on this project and I didn't know what it was. And I didn't know until I was airlifted out of Boca Raton, Florida, heading for Africa in the back end of a B-24. And a gentleman came out. There was about 15 of us. Gentleman came out and said, all right, this is where you're going, fellas. You're going to fly the hump. And we said, the what? And this was our introduction to the China-Burma-India theater. And this is right after Madam Chiang Kai-shek had made a deal with President Roosevelt to start supplying Chiang Kai-shek's army, Stilwell's army, in Western China by flying equipment, ammunition, gasoline over the hump, because the Japanese had taken the Burma Road, which was the primary avenue of taking supplies into those armies. So we started flying the hump. My first hump flight was actually in early 1943, May 1943. And
Don, let me interrupt you for a moment
yes.
here. You better, for potential audience, you better tell them what the hump actually was.
Good point. The hump is well defined in this book by a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Colonel Don Downey. And it was the lifeline for the Chinese and for General Stilwell's Army of American soldiers in Western China, headquartered primarily in Kunming, China. With the Burma Road taken by the Japanese, they started to rebuild the Burma Road. They called it the Lido Road. It would take many, many months to do that. So there was a new aircraft just developed called the C-46 by the Curtiss Aircraft Company that was coming in, and it was designed particularly and specially to do this job. It had a cargo of capacity of about 10,000 pounds and could fly as high as 25,000 feet, which you needed as a minimum to get over the Himalaya mountains. Most of those mountains to the north of Burma, including Mount Everest, which is just north of India, went up to 27,000 feet. So that was our job. And the job was to fly regardless of what the weather was. There was no such thing as deciding on whether the weather conditions were appropriate that we'd take off and fly. When your name was called, a plane was available, you went out and you took off and you flew. I think I have the honor of having the most flights by the U.S. military over the hump. I had 125 round trips, which in Army Air Corps language was 250 combat missions. And for that period of time, I was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross 3 times. The last award was made after I made my last trip in January 7th of 1945. January 6th and 7th were noted to be the worst weather that was ever recorded over the Himalaya mountains in that part of the world. We lost close to 50 airplanes in those 2 days. I flew a trip on the 6th, I flew a trip on the 7th, and had no problem. I made it all the way, although there's some very interesting things that happened in that process. The award that I received in January of 1945 noted that I had accomplished 125 round trips and had accumulated 900 hours in the C-46 to accomplish that. In addition, I participated in the invasion of Mishnah by a group that most people have heard of called Merrill's Marauders. They marched from northern Burma through the jungles all the way to the most northern Japanese airfield, which was called Mishina. And that was in the summer of 1944. And I had the privilege of supporting the Merrill Marauders by flying cargo in a Douglas C-47 into Mishina Airport. And then I went back after that, back to flying the Hump. I stayed in the Army Air Corps. Actually, by that time, they started calling it the Army Air Force, and it became the Air Force in 1947. I returned to the United States. I checked out in B-17s and B-24s, flew them for a while, but never in combat. Ended my military career flying 4-engine Douglas C-54s out of Miami down to South America, across to Africa, up to the Azores back to Miami. And I did that until both the Nazis regime surrendered and the Japanese surrendered. Then I decided it was time to get out. I hadn't a college education yet. The GI Bill was sitting there waiting for me. So I left the Air Force in late 46 and went to college at the University of Michigan. And I've been in the same business for 40 years. I worked for the Douglas Aircraft Company, designing airplanes, rockets, missiles, space vehicles, and retired at the age of 72 and enjoyed every minute of it. But the best part of my life, best part, was flying the Hump. I enjoyed every minute of it, and when you're 19 years old, you know you're indestructible, right? And that helps you get through all those tough periods. So is there anything else I should comment on there?
Don, the one thing I see in your notes is you mentioned a flight in which you delivered a plane without any crew.
Oh, we should not talk about that.
Oh?
That was an interesting thing. When I returned from India, I didn't want to get on a ship and come back to America that way, so I talked them into letting me take an old C-47 that had been over there flying in India for a long time, and it needed to be overhauled. And they said I could fly it from Karachi, India, all the way to San Bernardino, California. So a co-pilot and a radio operator and I got on that plane and flew through all the places we're reading about in the papers these days, and ended up in San Bernardino. But when I got to Dallas, Texas, my co-pilot, that was his home. And he says, I don't want to go all the way to California and come back. He says, how about I get out here? And I said, well, I guess so. And the radio operator said, I would like to get out too. So I said, okay. So I flew that C-47, which is on the airlines is known as the DC-3 in those days. And I flew it by myself from Dallas back to San Bernardino, which is totally illegal. The Air Force would not condone that. So that's what's referred to in those notes.
Okay. Okay, Don, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to tell us? I don't see anything else in your notes here.
Well, that's 40 years in 20 minutes. That's plenty for anybody.